once again, back once again, back once again, back once again, back once again with a beat. Let the bass kick.
The stock market is filled with individuals who know the price of everything but the value of nothing. So says Philip Fisher. He's talking about missing value for price. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on the Wisdom in All Things podcast. I'm Scott, your host. We'll ultimately talk about prioritizing value when investing. How invested are you in investing? I'm not a close follower of the market, but I do admire the savvy investor who can see the possibility of a future return. Most often when we talk about a return on investment, it's that the profit or benefit comes back to the investor. While not illogical, but perhaps detrimental, almost never takes into account the effect on the invested. What about the return or benefit to what you're investing in? What value was there in your investment beyond what it would return to you in profit? Aside from you're not caring, do you even know the value of what you're investing in? There can be quite a disparity between what something costs and what it is actually worth. Who assigned the value? Based on what? Beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, but value and worth must have a more objective standard. How can a painting fetch more than what is invested in saving a person's life? While we know the price or the cost to us, we can at the same time know little or care at all about our investment's actual value. Consequently, things of little or no value are treated like gold. That is, until they are of little or no benefit. J.R.R. Tolkien says, all that is gold does not glitter. Usually it's the inverse of Tolkien's aphorism from the Fellowship of the Rings that we all hear. It's that all that glitters isn't gold. All that glitters isn't gold. However, in light of Philip Fisher's quote and our view of investing in this podcast, it seems more potent to quote Tolkien directly. All that is gold does not glitter. We shouldn't be fooled by what something costs. We pay far too much for far too little. Career, property, what makes us happy. Yet there may also be opportunities where we will give everything we have to something whose value is incalculable. Children, spouse, God's kingdom. Real value and worth are what we should be seeking. Obvious in some cases, but like a savvy investor, otherwise requires thought and inquiry to see, not just the return from our investment, but most importantly, the future benefit to what we are investing in. So how do we make the wisest investment possible? We invest to cause something to grow or thrive, right? Something that has a high value should be invested in. God has placed a premium on his redemptive plan for mankind, which is a fantastic place to start when considering a high-value target worth your investment. Here are a few principles to keep in mind to keep us from investing poorly. Number one, do count the cost. There is nothing wrong with checking the price tag. Knowing what something costs is part of making a wise investment. However, making the decision solely on cost could mean you miss making a key investment. While cost should be a consideration, it should not be the final arbiter in deciding what to invest in. Secondly, what are you doing with what you have? Because they are overused and characterized, Christian quips don't always get the respect they deserve. And I think one of those that doesn't get maybe the respect it deserves is this one: blessed to be a blessing. God did tell Abraham that he will bless him and that he was to be a blessing. Blessed to be a blessing aptly frames our need to ask ourselves whether or not we're doing right by others with what we've been given. That is, how can we make the best investment with, to use another quip, our time, talent, and treasures? We have been given something that is specifically required for something else to grow and thrive. If we don't invest it, that thing may not happen. Thirdly, giving value priority over cost. Robert Arnott says, in investing, what is comfortable is rarely profitable. There's no doubt that investing wisely will be challenging. Whether it be emotional, mental, or physical, there will be sacrifice involved, but that shouldn't dissuade us from making the investment. When we prioritize value over what it may cost us, we are putting the benefit of who or what we invest in ahead of the potential return back to us. A deciding factor in wise investing is not how difficult it will be for us, but to what degree it will grow what we are investing in. A poor investment is not understanding or taking seriously the value of what is being invested in. And lastly, don't build bigger barns. The parable in Luke 12 describes the challenge of a prosperous man. What to do with the abundant harvest with which he's been blessed? Well, build bigger barns. We can either give away what we have or leave it behind for others. in bigger barns. We're not to accrue or acquire with the intention of growing our abundance, but are instead to spend to expand. God's blessing us is not intended to terminate with us, but that we take the opportunity to invest in what God has given us in unique and profound ways. Wise investing comes down to what we want to see grow and thrive. It will only cost us what we've been given and can't keep anyway. So why don't we instead freely invest in what is most valuable? It will have the multiplying effect of continually compounding what is right and good. So prioritize value when investing. Thanks for listening to the Wisdom in All Things podcast. You can hear more at wisdominallthings.com. Also sign up for the email so I can let you know what's going on ahead of time. And if you'd like to read the article before it's a podcast, you can do that as well by signing up for the email and read more about wisdom. It's all over at wisdominallthings.com.
Back once again, back once again, back once again, back once again, back once again with a beat. Let the bass kick.
Welcome to the Wisdom in All Things podcast. A rather quick dose of insight where we expose, explore, and execute on a topic that has to do with the mind, body, or soul. And we'll do that today with this topic: read more, remember more. Daniel Allais has this quote about reading religiously. We all hear about how Bill Gates and Ben Carson would stay home and read books relentlessly. Reading may not be an easy habit to develop, but it's one that can help you expand your business, your world, your life. Many good things come from it. And I would add this, that reading consistently but mining each book for what it's worth may be the better place to start. Reading faster, better, or more isn't all about work or launching a business. But I've always appreciated someone who's able to read consistently and actually remember what they read. I'm somewhat of the opposite. Developing good habits, reading more, remembering more is how I approach the idea of reading. But too often, articles like this tend to overamp a concept. But as you'll see from this and other posts, I'm all about getting in, getting what you need, and then getting out. Daniel Allais relates 5 tips he used to read more and remember more. He says this: learn how to speed read, don't read cover to cover, set time limits, read the easy books first, and only read the best books. Now, you may not have a magic number, but reading more and developing the habit of retention can have profound benefits. So I'm not suggesting setting a personal best for a number of books read in a year, but even if it's 12, like one a month, and you're able to integrate the most important or most appropriate parts for you into your life, well, that certainly will be a win. Based on Allais' 5 tips that I just mentioned, let me suggest an action plan. First, identify what it is you want or need to learn more about. Is there an area of your life that is screaming for a little attention? Perhaps something that would help you in your line of work, but not necessarily. If you had the chance to start something new, would you know how to go about starting it? What is your heart leading you to explore? So that's all about identifying what it is you want or need to learn more about. Secondly, scour that interest or desire for the most recommended books. It can be as simple as an Amazon search of bestsellers in that particular category that you're interested in. I've also taken it as far as a Google keyword search, or what does your favorite author or coach or blogger or business person, entrepreneur suggest that you read about that. Third, set an appointed time and be ready to read whenever. To develop the habit, we'll need to nail it down with a daily time reserved for this purpose, but also have the book article handy to take advantage of at unexpected times that you have to read. It'll also help develop the habit of making reading a priority. Fourth, with your hands on what you want to consume, strategically attack it. Review the inside flaps and the table of contents to get the context, and identify chapters that are most important to you or for you. Skim those selected chapters to get kind of this overview of what you need to attack. And then fifth, read with purpose. While you read, write down what you want to apply. Now, there may be more that you find interesting, but at the very least, record what it is you're going to integrate into your life. Taking notes is always a good idea for comprehension and recall. There's the 5 tips for reading more and remembering more. Identify what it is you want to need or learn more about. Scour that interest or desire for the most recommended books. Set an appointed time, but also be ready to read whenever. And with your hands on what you want to consume, strategically attack it and read with purpose. There. Get in, get what you need, and get out. Aim for value, not volume. There are quite a few more episodes at the website. Stop by wisdominallthings.com for the rest of them. Be sure to sign up for the email version if you'd like that. wisdominallthings.com.
Back once again, back back once again. Back once again, back once again, back once again with a beat. Let the bass kick.
This is the Wisdom in All Things podcast, and really it's just an audio version of the article that you can have sent to you if you sign up for the email. Articles, other podcasts, and the sign up for the email version is all over at wisdominallthings.com. Today we're talking about refining your routine, replacing bad habits. John Rampton says it's one thing to complain, whine, and vent at our frustrations in life, but does that really get you anywhere? No matter how much you complain, nothing will change if you don't take the wheel and actually do something to make your situation fulfilling. So we need to be realistic about change. You'll find from reading a few issues, listening to a few podcasts, that I'm more into a general consideration of improvement than I am that person that's really into the movement that is self-improvement. In other words, we need to identify and set aside the hype and overconfidence in the human spirit. I'm all for it, but you need to be realistic. By design, we are limited, and we also need to be aware of that. Of course, understanding that balance is what this email and blog are all about. But make no mistake, we're to get off our rear ends, close our mouths, and report for duty. We will be the agent through which change occurs in our lives, and we have a lot to do with it. But what I'm suggesting is that we live more wisely by refining our routines. I linked to the full article below that I'm referring to. There's not really any real secrets in it, so I'll save you the longer read by highlighting the two things that may in fact help you become a little leaner in your approach to living wisely. First, waking up early, at least earlier. And I can attest to this approach. It may take a little effort to transition to an earlier bedtime, but it is so well worth it. Being able to wake up to a quiet house provides the focus you need to think, to pray, to plan, those very, very important things that set the whole pace, strategy, focus of your day. The second thing is replacing bad habits. One other point worth noting is how we need to not just stop doing certain things. We need to replace those things we should no longer do with things that are worth doing. Whatever you need to stop doing, determine what it is and what you will do instead. Two things to help you live more wisely by refining your routines. It's waking up early and replacing bad habits with what you should do instead. Go to wisdominallthings.com to hear other episodes and to get signed up. If you'd like to do this through email, I'll send you the wisdom for free. Because who couldn't stand to exercise just a little bit more wisdom? Go to wisdominallthings.com.
Back once again. Back once again. Back once again. Back once again. Back once again with a beat. Let the bass kick.
Hey, welcome to the Wisdom in All Things podcast. It's a rather quick dose of insight where we expose, explore, and execute on a given topic that has to do with the mind, body, and soul. It's just good all-around training. Hey, I'm Scott. Today's topic, relieving head knowledge before your head pops. Because it could happen. We're going to look at head knowledge versus heart knowledge. Here's a quote from Josh Squires. He says, how do we go from the instruction of Proverbs 3:5, which says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, do not lean on your own understanding, to the personal affirmation of the writer of Psalms 56, verses 3 and 4, where it says, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. In other words, how do we go from head knowledge to heart application? So I want you to picture an orange, and then I want you to picture that orange on top of a toothpick. Okay, so the toothpick is your body, and the orange is your head. That could be your head. Okay, maybe not literally, but spiritually, that actually is what can happen if we're not careful, which is the danger of head knowledge. It's what our heads look like if all we do is store up knowledge, like an orange on a toothpick. Strong in the head, weak in the body, which is precisely what we're trying to prevent with these podcasts. Wisdom is more than knowledge. See, knowledge puffs up if there's no place for it to go. If we're not doing anything with it, the heart grows weak and the body withers. In other words, head knowledge should lead to action. James makes this pretty clear in the Bible. He says this, but don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. That's James 1:22. Unfortunately, gravity is no help here. It just isn't a natural occurrence. So what to do if it's all in your head? When we think of the phrase, it's all in your head, of course, we use that phrase to infer a level of psychosis. However, it may not be too far-fetched when discussing that our knowing is void of the reality of doing. Consider these approaches to help our head knowledge flow out through our hearts. First, focus the heart on the mind. Dr. David Jeremiah says, the Bible speaks of the brain as the center of our thinking. and has much to say about the condition of our minds. The heart represents our affection, emotion, personality. In Matthew 23, Jesus censured the scribes and Pharisees for studying the law without applying it to their lives. Setting our affections on what we know to be right and good can be the tipping point for moving from knowing to doing. Eventually, we'll care enough to act. Secondly, don't be persuaded by the path of least resistance. Josh Squires again says, have realistic expectations for the presence of both suffering and service in the Christian life. He says, Paul is clear in both Romans 5 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Belief in God's promises doesn't shield us from pain, but rather redeems it. The gospel tinges our pain with hope and thereby makes it more manageable, more purposeful, not non-existent. There may be a bit of paralysis when we are mentally focused on finding the path that has the least amount of obstructions. And we should know that we are to expect opposition when doing what God has called us to. So secondly, don't be persuaded by the path of least resistance. And then third, if there's more God coming in, it should lead to more God coming out. Josh says scripture memorization is vital. It is a forgotten art in the age of the search engine, but being able to recite one or more of God's actual promises from His Word, rather than just some general Christian truth, is crucial. So both meditating on Scripture and memorizing a hymn or a song that accurately communicates God's truth can be used by the Spirit to prompt action. Knowing what to do goes hand in hand with being able to apply it when it is needed. God will provide both opportunity and means to act as we are sufficiently taking in His truth. And given music's emotional power, it can drive our emotions toward doing. Next thing to do if it's all in your head is think others first. Focusing on others should also be a proper motivator for moving from knowing to doing. Others may have need for what you do know. How is it that they would benefit from it if it never leaves our heads? And lastly, obligate yourself. Josh again says, applying God's promises of grace and comfort to our hurting, fearful, or angry heart is where the rubber meets the road for many Christians. So a first step, or perhaps a new step, may be to obligate ourselves to a need in the church or to someone we know is struggling. Practice the action we need to take to allow the freer and more consistent flow of head knowledge into full knowledge. It's called epignosis, and it has the sense of knowing from having experienced something firsthand. In other words, you know honey is sweet not because you read about it, but because you've actually tasted it. Action begets action. So what to do if it's all in your head? In other words, moving that head knowledge into your heart and seeing it basically come out of your life has to include that we focus the heart on the mind, that we're not persuaded by the path of least resistance. The idea that more God coming in should lead to more God coming out of our lives. Think of others first and just go ahead and obligate yourself. Nothing changes, nothing gets better, no one feels loved, no one is appreciated, nothing is corrected, guided, or stopped without our pushing head knowledge down through to our hearts and out our limbs and lips. Nothing wrong with gaining knowledge. Problem comes when we don't do anything with it. If you're interested in reading through what the Bible has to say about wisdom, go to wisdominallthings.com, and under the Wisdom tab, you'll be able to look into the Old and New Testaments, as well as some great quotes on wisdom and other helpful articles. It's all at wisdominallthings.com.
Back once again, back once again, back once again, back once again, back once again with a beat. Let the bass kick.
A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. That from Nelson Mandela. Hey, I'm Scott with the Wisdom in All Things podcast, where we look at applying wisdom to life in 3 areas: mind, body, and soul. On this episode, finding rest, not relief, in God. John Bloom has pointed out that Jesus often calls us to rest in the areas of life where our flesh wants to work, and to work in the areas of life where our flesh wants to rest. Very important that we know when to rest and when to work. And it really comes down to understanding what it means to rest in God. We had the absolute pleasure of being able to live in Colorado for almost 7 years. We were nestled along the foothills closer to Boulder, but also with an easy reach of Fort Collins and Estes Park and Denver. Long's Peak was on display in our neck of the woods, but on a clear sunny day, of which there were many, you could see the top of Pikes Peak all the way down in Colorado Springs. My wife's parents lived in the Springs, so we frequently had the occasion to see Colorado's most familiar 14er in all its splendor, snow-capped being one of our favorites. The sun rising on the Rockies is a sight to behold, though the Rockies elicit a sense of peace, strength, and majesty at just about any time of day. The picture I've included in the post at wisdominallthings.com doesn't even do it justice, but as I write this particular podcast, that is my view and my rest, sitting on the side porch at my in-laws in Colorado Springs. Fresh mountain air in a valley just north of Garden of the Gods, relaxing with a latte, just leisurely typing away. This place, at this time of day, is so ripe for peaceful, meaningful reflection. Maybe a little hiking, but a whole lot of relaxing. This, to me, is the picture of rest. Fortunately, our rest is not dependent on the environment. In fact, we can find rest in the midst of the storm. No mountain view required. That is because true rest, the deepest rest, that is rest for the soul, is not found in a place, but in a person. Just listen to Jesus' offer of rest in Matthew 11, 28 and 29. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, and you will find rest for your souls." Tell me that doesn't feel good. Who says there's no rest for the weary? Jesus extends an open invitation to anyone feeling labored and laden. Come and get what your soul needs. But leave it to us to screw up something as easy as resting. As John Bloom revealed, a part of our unrest is that we are working at things we can't ultimately change and are resting in areas where we were actually intended to make a difference. There's a reason I use the word unrest. Not to imply that it is the opposite of rest, but that it gives us a glimpse of a soul that has not found rest. While there is the picture of unrest that is fed to us in the news, when we screw up rest, our lives do reflect the turmoil and anxiety of being in a state of dissatisfaction, disturbance, and agitation. Our souls are overwhelmed and weary, and our unrest causes further unrest. So, how about finding rest, not relief, in God? Finding rest in God can be somewhat deceptive because it can too easily be confused with relief. Relief is beneficial, don't get me wrong, but it is not rest. The rest that Jesus provides isn't physical, emotional, or mental relief, but is restorative and rejuvenating and frees us from soul-weariness. He addresses the problem, not the symptoms. Consider the following to clear up any confusion between the two and help you escape the cycle of seeking relief. First, rest in God. I know, but it can be helpful to start with the obvious. We need to remember to not treat God like ibuprofen. While he can certainly provide relief, he alone can provide what we really need, rest. God and rest go hand in hand. If you want rest, it can only be found in God. If you find God, you will have rest. Relief only temporarily soothes the symptoms. Secondly, relief does not relieve unrest. Relief is something we seek, typically when forced. The pain or impasse we're facing requires us to stop for the moment, without regard for whether or not we should even continue. Relief is a pit stop until we can get back on the road to keep driving in what may very well be the wrong direction. Imagine the unrest caused by someone driving down a road in the opposite direction of traffic. Yeah, you're going somewhere, but everybody knows you're going in the wrong direction. Rest releases our grip on the wheel, allowing us to see God's perspective and to be restored and rejuvenated for the path that He would have us travel. And thirdly, pick your yoke wisely. In our pursuit of relief, aka fool's rest, we seek to unburden ourselves. After all, a lighter load means less stress and strain. Good thinking. But you're still going to have a yoke. So pick wisely. In Matthew 11, Jesus refers to His yoke as light and easy, which means we can have rest from the heavy, burdensome yoke. It's not that we ever can be free of a yoke. We just need to pick the right one. So rest in God, not try to find relief. Remember that relief does not relieve the unrest. And pick your yoke wisely. Simply find God, find rest. Rest from the burden of working at what we have no business doing, to instead rest in the shepherd who leads us beside still waters, restores our souls, and guides us through the hills and valleys of the life that He has intended for us. Thank you for listening to the Wisdom in All Things podcast. Be sure to subscribe, tell other friends, family members, people you don't even know about the podcast. You can check out other episodes and get the free download of 5 Steps Towards Wisdom in All Things. It was the top 5 articles readers found to be most interesting. You can get that and more. It's all at wisdominallthings.com.